Welcome to Fluid Conversations, a platform where we invite global thought leaders to share their experience as well as their context on pertinent issues around progress in the global and local environment. The topics that we cover on this platform start all the way from the natural environment and span to economics and finance. Our host for Fluid Conversations is Mr. Desigan Naidu, who is the current CEO of the Water Research Commission, President of the Human Rights to Water, and Fellow at the Mapumbungwe Institute of Strategic Reflection. Before we start with our conversation, I'd just like to remind you that should you want to engage further on the topics that are discussed on this platform, feel free to engage with our host and our guest through their organizations or on their personal social media profiles. Over to you, Desigan.
Thank you, Kosi, and hello, everybody. I'm quite thrilled today to introduce a very special guest. He's a critical thinker. He is known as a pioneer advocate for sustainable development and has a long track record in this domain. He's had pivotal building roles in the IUCN, particularly in Africa and South Africa, in the Worldwide Fund for Nature, the WWF. He has spent time at a university, at the University of Stellenbosch, and currently his latest project is founder of the African Climate Foundation. He's an analyst, a commentator, a thought leader in the development trajectory of the green economy. I am, of course, talking about Saliem Fakir. Saliem, welcome to Fluid Conversations.
Thank you, Desigan, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Let's talk the green agenda, because this is the stuff that we've been talking about on the back of what the UN Secretary General introduced as the Global Decade of Action and the Global Acceleration Framework, talking about build back better. And we want to do even better than that. We want to build forward greener. But I think it's fair to say that the green agenda has been shaky for at least the last decade. It's taken serious knocks in the world. The political forces have been quite engaging in the wrong direction. I think we will have to accept. But we've also seen some really important political movements. So what does it mean to have a Biden in the White House? Is this positive for the green agenda? Will we be accelerating in that direction?
You know, the Biden campaign has come very strong around climate change issues. And I think we need to recognize that the US is very critical in the global stage, particularly the multilateral agreement around climate change. We've seen big tectonic shifts happen in Europe around the Green Deal, the notion of the Green Deal. And China is also looking to be net zero or at least carbon neutral by 2060. So these are significant, I would say, structural changes that are likely to happen in these economies. And I can't see the US, see itself be left behind. Effectively, we're talking about investments in a new set of technology and the technology wave that will result from that, particularly in the space of hydrogen, green hydrogen development. And so that will also be a big boost for renewables and stronger uptake of renewables, because there will be demand for green hydrogen. So I think this is a very important development in the world. And hopefully, if Trump goes peacefully, by the end of this month and early January, we are already seeing the ramp up of the US presence on the climate agenda beginning to grow. And John Kerry has been, been assigned the task of becoming like a special envoy on climate issues for the US. So, and he's quite a seasoned politician around this debate globally.
Thank you for that. And I think you're right. I think that there is a movement and there is a wave that's going across the world right now, if you like, a little bit of greener optimism. But we're not seeing much of that movement on our own continent or even our own country. Does this mean that we just have a little bit of a lag and we're going to catch up? Or does this mean that we have a new green divide?
So the green divide is possible if we allow it to happen. I think we are going to be foisted certain realities, and there will be what I would call a climate geopolitics that we cannot escape. And that is because if we are to make the assumption that in the next decade there's a fundamental restructuring of at least European economy and China's economy around a net zero target, this is too fundamental for at least Africa and South Africa to ignore. I think what we as a foundation, we do keep track of the debates, especially between the EU, the Europe-Africa relationship, and particularly the discussions going on between the EU and the AU around this relationship and the next trade relationship. I think the reason Africa is behind at the moment is that it's basically the COVID-19 pandemic has been a major setback for African economies. It's not that they are not interested in green issues. They are trying to deal with, if you want, a set of barriers to recovery that has got to do with resolving the debt crisis that is affecting Africa. And they have to resolve that and be able to build back and reconstruct the economies in order to build back green, by the way. They can't do that until they can actually resolve that. But it's possible to engineer both outcomes simultaneously. But the politics around the debt resolution and broader economic recovery has to be first resolved before any further discussions around green recovery can actually be established. They are not, I don't think discussion around green recovery is a barrier. It's just that the focus should be on how it complements a broader recovery program and not the other way around.
As somebody who pushes strongly for certain points in this domain myself, it's uncomfortable because one of the things that we've been pushing for the longest time is that retrofitting economies is expensive business and very difficult business.
Right.
And what Africa presents to the world is an incredible laboratory, precisely because of its underdevelopment, to be able to make this transition to a green economy, to a non-fossil fuel economy. Is this not an opportunity we potentially are going to lose?
So there's definitely an opportunity for us to leapfrog these technologies, but the bottom line is that they occur in a macroeconomic context which we cannot ignore. So we can sign up to the best NDCs, nationally determined contributions you want, but the fundamental issue is that the macroeconomic conditions will determine the rate of adoption of let's say, new technology wave. Some of them are already market related. And if you look at the cost of renewables, for example, have come down radically. But in many parts of the African continent, the cost of capital is very high. And some of the financial markets are not mature enough to provide the level of market confidence, risk associated with financial instruments, or even the credit ratings of the countries are poor, or the exchange rates are weak. But I think there are lots of discussions going on around innovative finance instruments to allow for these technologies to be adopted, and they have to be denominated in the currencies of those countries, not in foreign currencies. They might be backed by foreign currencies as a form of guarantee, but actually they have to be denominated in these currencies for them to make sense. So the challenge is not technological or any of that sort. It's just simply the cost of capital. There are, in some sectors, the state will have to play a big role, and the capacity of a state is determined by its fiscal space it has. So there are lots of other groundwork that needs to be achieved. Also, consumers must feel confident with the technology, and they must be able to have the financial wherewithal to be able to buy and consume those technologies. And we also have to create the kind of credit mechanisms at these very individual household levels for people to be able to purchase at least, the goods and services that are generated by the new green technologies. So I think the second part I would say is that we also have to wait a bit. It's better for us to adopt the technologies once the technology risk and scale has been reached in other advanced economies, because then it becomes cheaper for us to adopt. So in some cases, we're better off waiting than not. That's really what the essence of leapfrogging is. You become a late starter, but you actually converge with the advanced economies at more cost-effective ways.
So that is true. And, when we're thinking about cutting-edge technology, what you put forward is, in fact, the right kind of trajectory. But a fair amount of the transition isn't about cutting-edge technologies, is it? I mean, it is about things like solar-powered pumps, right, to be able to access groundwater. It's about right, non-sewage sanitation, not right, waiting for a grid to come and catch up with you, right, to be able to have clean sanitation services. Surely those kinds of things don't need the wait.
That's very true, and I think that requires the government to have an enlightened view, particularly around its ability to use its procurement power to be able to support the development of that segment of the market, and it's all pretty much about putting certain standards, requirements in the specifications, whether it's building specifications. So it's a regulatory issue. And if the government is the primary purchaser of these services and technology, then it should be able to use its procurement power to be able to scale up some of these technologies. So there's, in some cases, absolutely no excuse for this. It's just a matter of the state being able to come behind these market mechanisms to be able to deliver these services. There are technologies that are owned by private players, but the state, can use its leverage and its regulatory power to facilitate this. So that's, and we've seen that with renewables, by the way, in South Africa. The moment the state provided the guarantee mechanisms, it was able to set up a one-stop shop procurement facility like the Independent Power, Power Purchases Office. It was able to roll out quite significantly a bidding process, and you saw the scale at which we went very quickly, actually, and remarkably so, in a country that's very difficult to operate some of these procurement processes. So I do think that the Renewables Independent Power Producers Program has shown us what can be done. I believe there's a similar discussion happening around water and the procurement of water technologies and so on. I think diesel and stuff like that. And we can do that with a range of other things, electric vehicles, etc., especially with government fleet.
And the thing you're talking about in the water sector is what we're starting to call the independent water producers, the IWPs, as a concept. Right. So you see a genuine future in this? You see that it will provide the right kind of encouragement to get general society to start investing as well and creating substantive private sector producers of various goods, renewable energy, water, other goods in the African market, in the general South as a whole?
So if you create a kind of policy framework and a regulatory framework that is able to supply the demand, okay, so you kind of force the demand, then suppliers will, where the technology is well developed, suppliers will try to meet that demand. So I think, that's really possible. And I do think that we are moving into a carbon-constrained world, which is going to start manifesting in the global economy in different dimensions. I always talk about three waves in the Green Revolution, if you want. There was the first wave, which was normative, or it was a moral issue. We had to do the right thing. Then it's sunk in the finance sector and the investment world that all the firms that they invest in have to certainly develop environmental, social, and governance criteria, ESG criteria. So it became a compliance thing. Actually, we're moving now beyond compliance. We're actually moving into major structural shifts that are much broader than at the firm level. They are fundamentally about how sectors become competitive in the future. And that's going to have enormous impacts on developing countries. And we're going to be forced to try to meet those standards. And if the more longer we delay it, it's going to come at an enormous cost to us to meet those requirements, because they will slowly and gradually be enforced on us. Effectively, that's what the Green Deal is in Europe, by the way. And that's why the African negotiators are pushing back, because they want to understand that if the Green Deal is going to begin to set up a structural shift, the African countries, in order to meet them, will need the right tools, whether it's trade, regulatory, and other support, to be able to meet those requirements in the future, and also adapt their economies to this change. So, Desikan, I'm more of a stronger view these days that we're actually into a new modernizing era, and we are going to probably in the next decade see much, much more of that happen. And we better believe that's going to be true. I don't think we can escape that.
Let's pursue that a little bit, because we must unpack what this promise is, because
right.
We have a multitude of problems in the world as a whole, yes,
right.
in the global south, yes, but let's talk about this continent. One of the issues is that the rate of development post the colonial era has not caught up with any of the momentum that we have dreamt about. Right. It certainly hasn't in South Africa after apartheid. And then we have, next to that, we have the most youthful continent in the world. And there's a possibility of a demographic dividend, but there's also the possibility of a demographic burden if you don't get that structure to move towards a better industrialization. Right. Can't the green agenda provide the right kind of engine to bring the prosperity on the one hand, this demographic dividend on the other hand, and maybe realize the thing that we were talking about in WSSD about people, prosperity, and planet in a very real kind of way?
So we potentially have the instrument to do that is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which becomes effective on the 1st of January. And there's certainly discussion starting to happen to use the collective strength of the African continent to be able to create the trade policy framework that allow for these goods and services to be exchanged on the continent. But we have to, in order to do that, we first have to get African countries to, both at a collective level, within the region as a whole, and individually, to begin to see the importance for moving from resource dependency to broader diversification. One route of that is actually restructuring the agricultural sectors and the energy sector, and they're actually intertwined. And that is, in my view, connecting the two, energy, agriculture, is the route to further, if you want, upgrade and a movement towards industrial development, because energy is really key to that. Then complementary to that is the development of our human capital, which is the youth. So I do think that, there are three steps. Creating the fiscal space for a sort of a reworking and rewiring of national economies. That has to be around what I would call an energy-agriculture nexus, because fundamentally agriculture is still the dominant form of economic activity. and that allows for some level of intra-regional development of industrial capability, which will then create, if you want, momentum behind the need for the certain kinds of skills. We're going to have to fast track that skills. The normal university mechanism is not going to work. We have to create special centers that are, if you want, hands-on education model, which is basically people being fast-tracked with theory, but also getting into the practice of actually working in key industrial sector. Digital technologies is also vital to that. So I do think that the opportunities are enormous, but we can't delay this process. We actually have to try to catalyze it as fast as possible.
Saliem, what you're saying is the algorithm has been worked out. It's complicated, it's a little bit chaotic, but we have the equations. We know what we need to do if we want to go in this direction. So the question is, what do we need as that big start, as that push to organize for us to get the right kind of momentum going? Because one of the anxieties we all have is that we might not build back better, we might build back worse and go back to
Absolutely.
a very difficult way of doing things.
Yeah.
Please.
So I think next year is a very important historical, moment for Africa. It's at a precipice, particularly around the debt issue. So it's got to resolve the debt issue fundamentally. But I do think the crisis, the pandemic crisis, at least from what I can see and in all the webinars I've been participating in, the industrial, inter-regional trade and industrial development is on the tongues of many people. And, that percentage of inter-regional trade is very poor at the moment. I think it's about 16% or even less than 18%. And we can certainly up that. I think allowing, the free movement of goods and services along the continent, that will then encourage, a longer-term investment in infrastructure. And if you can beneficiate as much of the minerals-based agricultural development on the continent through that interregional trade, all the better. It's going to be a decade-long journey, but it has to start probably in January next year. And I'm confident that at least that vision exists. It's a matter of coordinating it across the continent. It's important, especially as a foundation. We are also interested in looking at oil and gas countries and how to get them to move, away from a resource curse problem, and they could play a very significant role in terms of their ability to generate windfall revenue in the short term, and to be able to certainly try to look at investing in diversified economic strategies, which will then unlock other potential. So we're going to start with what I would call keystone countries, and then move it further. Not all countries in Africa will be able to meet the industrial trajectory, but they could benefit from the industrialization that is possible by other leading countries in the continent.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Can you hear me?
Saliem Fakir, founder of the African Climate Foundation, in summary saying that investment in green growth will organize for the people development that we want to see. It can even move to the prosperity that we want around the world. And we certainly will be able to do it in a sustainable way and stop cheating future generations by using all of the resources up now. That is an excellent vision. Thank you very much, Saliem. Are there any last words you have for our colleagues to draw inspiration so that they can get to the next step of this journey?
I think that next year is going to be an exciting year. They always, let's use that sort of adage, crisis is also a great opportunity. And I do think that that is certainly the way people are beginning to see it. And let's hope that we can capitalize on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Saliem.